and this time I'm bringing you the person that you've actually come to see. Simon Thomas from Paragraf. So Simon, it's a pleasure to have you. Why don't you just say hi first, actually, and tell everyone. I'm pretty sure they're all familiar with Paragraf being almost like a household name in startup and ventures, but yeah, like your own words on who you are, basically.
No, thanks a lot, Francesco and Christina, and for inviting me to be here this evening. It's nice to have this chat. And Charlie, good to meet you. Apologies, I didn't make it in time to see your presentation. I was having a bit of a battle with Zoom. But yeah, hello everybody. Thanks for your time this evening. My name's Simon Thomas. I'm the CEO of Paragraf, which is a company that's expertise is around bringing new materials into the semiconductor industry. Our first focus material is graphene. We're the first company in the world to create graphene-based electronic devices at scale. So this is moving from standard semiconducting materials into a world of 2D materials where an increase in the properties and performance parameters and characteristics of what you can potentially do with semiconductor materials is going to be brought to the forefront by us. So yeah, thank you for inviting me to be here. Looking forward to it.
Perfect. So just before I go, I want to check, Chris, do you want to say hi right now and tell everybody about Frontier? I mean, on my side, it's pretty easy. What I do, Silicon Roundabout Ventures, besides running community events, especially together with Frontier, we write pre-seed and seed checks into companies that we hope will become the next Paragrafs in a few years. And obviously, when we can bring in people from the ecosystem that have already sort of jumped the first hurdle and now scaling in growth stage, it's always great to bring that knowledge back to the founders, like you guys, or fellow investors like you guys over there listening and wanting to participate in the deep tech scene. Chris, I see you ready, so I'm going to shut up and let you say hi.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Charlie, of course, for supporting, and to Smart 81 for supporting this type of activities. For those who are not familiar with the Frontier Deep Tech, we are the ecosystem of deep tech, not just here in the UK, but in Europe. And we run activities pretty much every month. So this webinar was very exciting, actually, because Simon is, I know Simon for some time now, and he's an incredible person. He's very humble. He's always willing to help. And yeah, I can't wait to see what he has to teach us this evening.
Just made a typical rookie mistake of like looking at my phone for the correct spelling and then obviously putting it wrong. And of course, the secret is in the sauce, right? In the graphene of the play. So let's start with that, Simon. Back in the beginning, this is obviously about how to optimize resources. What does it mean? Well, Paragraf wasn't always, a beyond Series B company. It had to start somewhere. So what got Simon Thomas to start Paragraf, decide to work with graphene specifically to tackle semiconductor issues? And when you get started, probably there was less of an ecosystem than there is now in deep tech. There is still a lot to build today, so I can only imagine a few years back. What were your first steps? And maybe some, things you did right, things you did wrong, to actually get Paragraf off the ground?
Wow, that's a big question. Definitely did a lot of things, a lot more things wrong than I did right, I think. But it's good to have learned from them. Paragraf actually, interestingly, was kind of a serendipitous company. I never had any kind of ideas of spinning a company out of university or creating a business in this way. But my background is actually in compound semiconductors. I spent 15 years working in Asia with some of the large foundries, making gallium nitride, and the lights behind me, and helping large foundries get their first products in gallium nitride LEDs and power devices. When I left that industry, there was a professor at the University of Cambridge, Professor Sir Colin Humphreys, who heard that I'd left the industry. And at the time, he was working with the Nobel Prize winners for graphene in Manchester. And he was creating gallium nitride on a large wafer. And he wanted to put graphene together with the gallium nitride. And they were sending him their graphene, and their graphene, of course, was tiny little flakes of graphene peeled off a graphite block. So there was an immediate problem, which was if we want to create devices made of graphene or using graphene, we need to get to a position where we can provide graphene in the same way as the semiconductor. So on a wafer that can be processed. And that was the kind of start of the idea. So I helped Colin. I then invented a methodology to create graphene wafer scale, which was, again, serendipitous. I didn't have any idea how to do it. I was not an expert in graphene at the time, knew nothing about it, to be fair. But what I did know was how to make compound semiconductors. And so I just decided to try and make graphene the same way as I made compound semiconductors. And fortunately for us all, it worked. So that was the start. And as I say, a lot of companies are formed due to the fact that an idea or an innovation happens due to the collision of two separate worlds. And that's what happened here. But in terms of turning it into a company, even at that point, we didn't really think about turning it into a company. It wasn't until I realized what graphene could actually do. So once we'd made it, it was like, oh, great, let's write some papers, let's get into nature and all this type of stuff, the type of thing you do at a university. Then we started to learn about actually all of the incredible things that graphene could create, the products it create, the change in basically global electronics that could be brought forward through applying graphene. And that's when the idea came. So I think
the days when everybody thought, this seems amazing, but what exactly can we make it do in commercial applications? And you were trying to find that.
Yeah, so a lot of people had made lab applications on very small pieces of graphene. But people have forgotten that it's great to do it in the lab, but unless you can convert that into a commercial size, then it's always going to stay in the lab. It's a common problem, right? Sure, many people on this call understand that. So that was the step that we overcame, that manufacturability, if you like. And so the first cost-saving tip I will give you, and the first thing that I would say would be what I would consider before spinning out, this is particularly spinning out of the university, use as much of the university resource to get as far along in your product development as you can at the start. Because while you're in university, most of the stuff is free because you're doing it on grants. As soon as you go into the outside world, you're paying for all of it. So you can have relationships with the university when you move out, but bear in mind it still comes with a cost because you have to set up a development agreement and all that type of stuff. So before you get to the spin out, while you're raising your capital, in fact, your first seed round, do as much as you can at the university before you get kicked out. So we moved on from that. I raised a seed round in 2017 to spin the company out. So although we had graphene layers, that's not what we based the company on. We then, because we had the material, we decided to make some of the devices that other people have been trying to make. And that's what Paragraf does today. We make graphene-based devices. We don't sell material. We're not a material supplier. We actually go further down the value chain and we create the devices and then sell the devices on into emerging markets and into most of our market spaces now are kind of EV batteries, EV vehicles, drones, satellites. So yeah, the real high-tech area of graphene, if you like, electronic graphene. So yeah, I think the next tip I'm going to give you about saving money comes just before we reach the seed round. The ecosystem, the spin-out ecosystem in the UK is fantastic. I mean, you know that, Francesco. You're involved in it now, right?
I'm actually still thinking, is this with irony or not? Because I guess depends on which uni you're from.
I think it's getting better everywhere. I think it was only, you were limited in the past to Cambridge and Oxford and maybe Imperial for big support, but I think it's now, Bristol's now a great place to be, and even up in the northwest in Liverpool and even in the northeast, it's starting to get investment there. So it's starting to get a lot better.
Did you have to do a big equity fight?
Well, thanks to people like you, right, and your funds.
No, I'm saying, but did you have to do a big equity fight when you had to negotiate your?
Oh, absolutely.
So that's what I was alluding to. So some founders probably here thinking like, oh, the TTO is asking me for like 30% of the company. Is that fair?
Oh, wow. That's a whole other conversation I can have with you about TTOs. Yeah, one piece of advice I'd give to everyone who's spinning out at the moment: stand your ground. TTOs, I know, I don't know whether there's TTOs in this conversation at the moment, but I'm going to say it anyway. Everybody wants the company to be successful and wants to spin out. TTOs have a starting point, i.e. the 30%, but they're not going to stop you from spinning out. So negotiate, and negotiate hard. We managed to get our share down to 3%.
Yeah, 10x, that's not bad.
Yeah, yes. And it's been diluted now, so it means
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah, but again, it's about trying to get everybody on board on the vision of, if this is not, Europe, 1990s type of spin-outs where Bosch would buy for peanuts. If you want to build a venture enduring business, you've got to go through multiple rounds of funding. And from the beginning to the end, people need to be aware that they're fighting to get that, few points of a, billion or multi-billion dollar company, or if it goes better, worse, a few hundred, but still, that's the goal. If you're starting from thinking what happens if I sell for 10, and that's your starting point of negotiation for a university, then it's not really on the same mindset, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the biggest mistakes that's happened, in my honest opinion, this is not other people's opinion, it's just my opinion. One of the biggest mistakes that's been made over the past, I would say, 5 or so years is TTOs trying to act like businesses. They're not businesses. They don't understand the business landscape. But there's been this drive towards being able to get value out of companies that spin out. And that's not wrong. That should happen. If you use the university resources, if you use the university services, then of course you should be giving something back. But unfortunately, the models with TTOs at the moment are not grown up enough to understand the opposite side of that argument, which is in the days when you're trying to grow a business, at the start of a business, you need to have full access to all of your capabilities, whether that's the equity to give into share options to go to employees, or whether it's, some TTOs are demanding royalties once you reach a certain level of revenues as well. And early stage companies, you pump all of that revenue back into growth. And so, there's got to be, I know there are some very good conversations going on with TTOs at the moment about how that becomes more aligned, but it needs to happen, and it needs to happen fast. I know businesses that have failed because of the constrictions of TTOs. But
okay. No, it's great. And actually, I picked up something there that you said right at the beginning, the collision of words in creating a company. That's actually funny because although in a completely different word, I backed a company called Anaphi that also uses graphene, but for batteries. And what drew my attention in the early chats was seeing how the chemistry and the physics of the founders was colliding in an interesting way to then create the product. And I realized, now you're saying this, and obviously it was completely unplanned, that sometimes some of the best, different type of products are not just because of an idea, but because of different talents, right? That different words that collide and different expertises that suddenly you just see something different because you talk. And maybe in a corporate, the best chemists, they always work on a problem because that's what they've been told to do, and that's what you're doing, and that's the mission. And they don't talk to somebody else, and there isn't that serendipity, right? That you might have. Once you launch, right? You've done your seed round, or you're about to do that. How do you maintain that balance between diving deeper into something that seems to be working versus keeping yourself like a startup and open to this, again, serendipity, is trying to be ahead of the competition, not end up a tiny corporate or being enslaved by what other people's may view the market, even if you disagree, type of thing?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's the most difficult for me. I think because Paragraf is a materials business, it's a product business, it's a manufacturing business, we have a lot of different facets that mean you have to bring different people into the business, and they all have different opinions on how things should move forward. And focus, I talk about this a lot, focus is absolutely key in those early days. But there's a problem in those early days. Most of what you need to hire are technical people and scientists. And I'm sorry, I'm a scientist and an engineer, so I'm including myself in the bracket of what I'm about to say. Keeping scientists that are looking at new stuff focused on the thing in front of them, as opposed to this new shiny thing they've discovered over here, is is a really difficult task, especially when you bring something like graphene to the world, where there's all types of things you can do with it. Getting a scientist to just go, actually, look, we need to develop, there's a product we need to get to. We need all your scientific knowledge to make this great. But more often than not, you end up getting 50% of them doing that and 50% of them going off to the other side. So yeah, it's a great question. And I think in those early days of the company, having the excitement is great to attract people, but you also need a couple of people that are pragmatists, that really understand that if we don't do something that the world wants, then there's no company at the end of the day. So we can keep doing scientific experiments and do wonderful stuff, but unless we actually start to push towards product and commerciality, then the company won't exist. You'll never get your next round of funding. So yeah, it's a difficult one, but finding, and the theme through what I'll say is finding the right people is critical at every stage in the business, and you need different people at different stages, by the way. But yeah, finding those switched on people that are excited by the research, but at the end of the day, when they go in the at the start of the day, when they go in the morning, they go, yeah, I'm really excited, but let's do this, let's get it done, and we'll give you 5 minutes at the end of the day to go and play with other stuff. So yeah, that's a really kind of key element in the early days. Having a clear roadmap as the CEO, having a clear roadmap that everyone can see, that's on the wall somewhere, that people go, okay, we know where we're going here. Particularly if you've got visionary kind of milestones on the roadmap, is also good for focusing scientists. One of our products that we're launching this year is a biosensor, and that biosensor has the possibility of completely changing how we diagnose conditions. So putting that on the wall in front of scientists and saying, look, what we will be able to do, is one way of turning their attention away from doing loads of experiments and turning towards this vision of changing the world. So having those displays and that kind of constant communication is really important too. So yeah, definitely I managed to hire a really, really down-to-earth person straight away, and that was a big help.
Okay, that's good, because actually, I was actually going to double down there, because obviously I'm raising my hand, on the software side, but also an engineer here. And I remember, up until last year, when there is a new library, oh, I want to try this out, and then you kind of forget where you even started, but we're all probably doing that. And on the theme, hiring, back, especially if you're in deep tech, you're an engineer, whatever. Not that you need to be an engineer necessarily to launch a fund. I don't claim that you necessarily need that, as much as you might need to launch a paragraph. But how do you transition from being the science guy into the CEO? Because obviously that's a massive step that you must have taken, right? Being Simon, going out into the lab, starting to talk to VCs, talking to commercial partners, setting the strategies. In the early days, probably still driving some of the technical development, but also having to wear all these hats. And in many cases, because obviously now, I'm going to the VC events where the founders are not there. I know what people talk about the engineers, and I'm thinking, I'm actually an engineer myself, but okay. So there is that sort of pre-concept of you need to have a commercial CEO. And then Simon comes along and he raises millions and is smashing it as an engineer. How do you do it?
Yeah, that's the big one. It's a big transition, to be fair, and I think I talk about this a lot. You've got to be committed, so you've got to believe in the idea. Because you're going to have to work a lot at the start. You're right. You have to look after the tech. You have to look after operations. You have to look after investors. You have to do a lot at the start. But I think the biggest kind of advice I can give there is, I go back to what I said before about the ecosystem of startups in the UK. It is actually incredibly supportive beyond investors. There are lots of people out there. There are lots of networks out there. Not all networks are good. I just want to say that. Some are very, very good. Some individuals are willing to give their time up as well to help you. So if I would really advocate in the early days, maybe even before you've closed your seed round, start talking to people in industry or people that have been through scale-up companies and done what you've done before. The amount of free advice I've got from people just by telling them we're doing something exciting, they want to come and see it. my payback for that is I want to get their advice about how they transitioned, how they go from being, as you say, an engineer, a scientist, into running a business. And actually, what I found over the past 5 years is there are many, many people out there that are willing to help you for free just out of interest. And in fact, some of the people that I talked to in the early days for advice ended up investing, which was quite nice. And they've become kind of long-term kind of people I can turn to talk to about problems. Now, they can't offer me any further advice, but they're good sounding boards. And a sounding board is just as good as someone giving you advice sometimes. But yeah, the transition is difficult. I still get those kind of, I still sometimes miss being in the lab. Not when there's problems in the lab anymore. I'm quite fine not being in there at that point. But yeah, it's but one thing I say this quite frequently to people, it's quite a privilege to get invested in as a CEO of a business. There's a lot of startups and spin-outs now, but if you look at the percentage of people that are able to do it, it's not many. And having the privilege of being invested in, having the privilege of running a company, it's such a massive opportunity for you to learn and for you to grow. People expect you to make mistakes, by the way. I don't think people talk about this enough. You're allowed to make mistakes. You don't have to be right all the time. You don't have to get everything perfect. Most investors, particularly, I'm sure you can add something to this. You don't expect everything. Maybe you do. I don't know. Maybe you're about to say something I don't like here, but you don't expect every CEO you invest in to get everything perfectly right from day one. And it's a learning process. And so the learning process, the more you can learn from other people and avoid their errors. Saying that, I didn't avoid some of the errors some people told me about, but that's life. Then the easier the transition is. But it goes back to that whole people again. Coming back to people, having the right people around you, having the right people you converse with, the right people that can sometimes listen to you when you're angry, because that you will be angry a lot. Not necessarily the business of people, but just sometimes things go slow, something gets in the way. You can have a massive high one day where you get a great result and you get a great step forward, and the next day you take 2 steps back. It's just the nature of deep tech. That's what happens. So also learning to, it's a really famous thing in football, right? Never celebrate the wins too much. Never get depressed by the losses too much. Just keeps straight in the middle. It's the same for CEOs of startup businesses. If you get too emotional either way, then you'll end up going off the rails.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I've done that.
Oh, interesting. Well, it sounds like you've surrounded yourself with the right people. By the way, I'm seeing some questions in the chat. There is also a Q&A, so that's probably easier for me to handle it. But since for now there is one is about technical, it's more about venture. Look, as a VC, just to get it off the ground, we back deep tech companies in infrastructure technology. So obviously we launched too late to get into Paragraf, but that would have been a great company to get into. We have a couple of semiconductors now, so different sides. Right. So that's easy. Let's make the questions about Simon, really. On my side, I'm just an investor, so like I'm the dumb guy in the room. Virginian is asking something more serious, which is, what would you say to deep tech VCs who done one of the founding researcher to be the CEO and recruit external CEO commercial BD with a general management background? So I guess it's, what if they push back on who should be CEO?
It's a really interesting question, and it's really topical, actually. What I've seen over the past couple of years is some VCs are pushing towards bringing people in as seasoned, experienced, not just CEOs, but also CCOs, so COOs, Chief Operation Officers. And I think this is VCs trying to maximize the potential of those spin-outs. I think it's a case-by-case basis. I know several companies that have spun out of university where a PhD student or a postdoc has become the CEO and gone, I don't like this. I like being involved in what I invented. Whereas you get other people who switch to it immediately and go, oh yeah, I like this new challenge. I like to be involved in the different parts of stuff. I think you've got to be clear. If you are the person that's leading the business and you're fundraising, I think you have to be clear with the investors you talk to. If you want to be the CEO, and you just have to communicate your vision, get that vision believed by the investors, and then it's a much easier job for you to go, well, I want to deliver this vision. It's my vision. It's what you're investing. Yes, you're putting the money in, but if you want to be successful, you've seen what I've presented. I'm going to get it there. So I think it's not a case-by-case basis, because a lot of people, the overwhelming majority, want to be the CEO, at least at the start. And so making what you say in a pitch, for example, really credible, showing that you're going towards the commercial goals, showing that you're not just doing experiments. I've seen a lot of pitches where, particularly from scientists, where the business, on the timeline of the business, it's just all experiments, it's all technical development, and there's no kind of communication of where we're going to get to, some commercial traction. So if you can communicate that to the investors you're talking to, and again, Francesco, you'll have an opinion on this, then that's what you want to do. However, also think of the flip side. How successful do you want to be? How quick do you want to get there? What is your outcome from the business? This is not a dirty thing to say, by the way. Sometimes for students from university, they don't believe this, but some people want to start businesses to sell them, right? So if you want to start a business and you want to grow it for 3 or 4 years, and the aim of it is for you to sell it and make some profit out of all of your hard work, that's fine, right? And sometimes in those cases, if you've got a short timeline and you're thinking to yourself, well, I want to maximize the value, I would think about whether you want some of those experts being brought in, because they can add value. Maybe not as the CEO, maybe you want to be the CEO, but bringing in a highly qualified COO and letting the VCs help you with that might be a good way forward. But I was always told, and maybe this is changing, and there's a great investor from Amadeus, you may have heard of him, Herman Hauser, from Amadeus Capital. He made one thing very clear in the pitch that I did to him. I don't invest in the idea as much as I invest in the people. And he said, when you come and talk to me, when you stand up in front of me, I need to be convinced that you can deliver. If you do that, I'm in. So just think about that, how you present yourself, and if you want to be that CEO.
Yeah, I mean, actually, on that note, for the little bit that I can add, being new to the scene, and bear in mind, basically I could be completely wrong, and then in 10 years' time, we will know if I was right or wrong, because that's how long it's going to take for the fund to prove itself. But I think you said something totally correct there, in the sense it's ultimately a people's business. Fun enough, especially in deep tech, because you would think, oh, in deep tech, you have already built something, and that's so true. But ultimately, this is just the seedling part, right? And so you will always need to keep building and driving people to it. And if it's not there, it's difficult. Whilst on the flip side, you can have great people that can basically jump past mistakes. You can probably pivot. You can probably have the right relationships to get past hurdles. And ultimately, back to the question, I think, being honest, I think, is probably even with yourself, is probably the best thing. Like, if you're talking to customers and to VCs, and half of them don't like you in the room, and maybe you're not the best CEO, and because and maybe you would hate it continuing to be. But on the flip side, if you just seem to be able to get well along with people, driving the vision, driving the mission, then who cares if you're a scientist? You will be the best CEO, right?
Absolutely brilliant point. Some investors you talk to, they want to understand that you understand the technology. They want to understand that they can't have somebody leading and this is a flip side to what I was just saying. In a lot of early stage companies, you can't have someone that's flown in as a CEO that doesn't understand the technology as well as you do, because it's a visionary sell at that point. You're selling the idea of the technology, so you have to be able to explain the technology. You have to be able to show what you're going to achieve through the technology. And so floating in CEOs at that point is difficult anyway. In the deep tech area, other businesses, fintech, stuff like it's a different matter. There are different people you could bring in, but in deep tech in particular, it's very difficult to find CEOs that could just come in and be the CEO of the business, at least in the early stages, as I say, when it's visionary.
Yeah, definitely. And once you start to move up, by the way, I see David has got a question there, but I think Simon might answer. So it's what leadership roles at Paragraf were hired too late and which ones, sorry, too early and which ones too late?
Okay, that's a good question. That's a really good question. So just actually reflecting back on the question before, but relating it to the CTO role. So what the other founder in the company took up the CTO role in the business. And he did that for some time, but very quickly realized he didn't want that responsibility. He wanted to be part of the technology, but he didn't want to grow the people side of the business. He didn't want to grow the tech teams. He didn't want to be the manager, the line manager. So we went through this process quite early on. And so we did not, between us, we discussed this, and we did not recognize that early enough. And so he stayed in the role for quite some time. Probably a year too long, which meant that the tech team kind of build and grow was put on my shoulders. So I ended up having to grow all of the business, including the technical side, which is the biggest side at that point. That kind of made it quite stressful for me for one point, but also made it a time drain on what I was doing, where I could have spent my time on the business side. So we didn't really hire a proper CTO quickly enough. And bear in mind, and most of you will have the same dynamics. In a deep tech company in the early stages, more than half your business is technical people. So as you grow, you've got a lot of technical people to start with. So it's that definitely, we did not get that right. Also, I would say that we didn't hire commercial leads quick enough. Understanding product market fit, and I've learned this lesson the hard way. Understanding product market fit right at the start of your business, it's never too early. It's never too early. Because what you'll find is if you take something to market that you believe the market wants, what you'll find out is you have a prototype or you have a proof of concept, and then they'll tell you, no, we want this and this. So getting a product manager is probably the right hire right at the start, so that they can help you scope out what customers want, scope out the landscape, position your product ready to be communicated properly to the customers you're targeting. That is a real key. So that's something that we haven't, well, I did not do right, to be honest. Also, I say a finance person. I was very, very fortunate in our business that I managed to get an FD from day one. So a financial director. You don't need a CFO at the start, by the way. And CFO skill sets are not required till much further on in the business. But a financial director that understands accounts management, somebody that is actually going to contribute. This is about money saving, or the title was. So somebody that's actually going to tell you when you're spending too much is always good, because as CEO, you tend to just go full speed. But if you find a good FD, most financial directors have ran HR, administration, and other business functions in the past. So they can take so much weight off your shoulders, particularly around the whole kind of administration side and HR side. So I would highly recommend the two things that I would highly recommend. One that I got right, which is the FD, because they can take so much stress off you. Two, which I didn't get right, was the product manager. They are critical now. If I started another business today, they would be the first people I hired.
Great. That's actually a great insight. Now you've got, let's say, some people right, some people wrong, but they're good enough. You've raised your little bit of funding. And then you're approaching, I guess, probably where a lot of startups, especially in deep tech, get stuck, raising multiple seeds rounds and never getting past the Series A. I mean, right now, you can actually showcase big brands, VCs on there, like let's say at growth stage, it also starts to become more of a game of who's already backed you, because later stage investor maybe diligence you less as much as they diligence them. What's your secret, if you can call any, like to not to get stuck in that trap of never quite delivering, kind of always needed a bridge, and actually getting your Series A right, and then basically starting to scale?
So I think one thing that I've always been quite good. So I worked in the semicon industry for, as I say, 12, 15 years, and worked in some fabs. So what I would call project management or project planning was a skill set I already had. In the semicon industry, if you get it wrong, and one day's downtime costs the company millions. So you've got to get it right. And so you've always got to be clear on what you're delivering and when you're going to deliver it. So if you want to, my advice is, if you want to, as you're going through those stages, whether it's seed, then Series A, and then onwards, if you want to make sure that you're a credible business, then just make sure that your business plan, and I don't mean a huge business plan, I mean the one slide that's got your milestones on, is pragmatic and deliverable. You're always going to do a lot of great stuff as a deep tech company. You're doing things that people have never done before. So there's always going to be this kind of excitement around, oh, wow, you've done this. But underlying that, having practical milestones that you are always achieving gives real credibility to investors. I've had the fortunate, I've had the fortunate situation where all the way up to Series B, we never missed a single investor milestone. So we went from day one through all the milestones. So every time I pitched, every time I talked to new investors, I could say to them, here's our milestone plan. I'll show you the one that we had from the seed pitch. I'll show you the one from Series A and now the one from Series B, and you will see we've hit every milestone. And the reason for that is, I go back to what I said before, focus. If you can focus on the delivery of what you've been pitching, you get a lot of trust. So having that real kind of visibility of, yes, I know I need to do this as a business, and this is when we're going to do it. And I know I need to do this as a business, and this is when we're going to do it. And being able to just completely demonstrate that constantly gives you such, I shouldn't really say this, but I will. It gives you such an edge over so many other businesses. VCs are used to deep tech companies missing milestones. It's the nature of deep tech. You never know what's coming next. So if you can be that one business that's hitting all your milestones, then you really stand out. A bit of advice, maybe I shouldn't say this with you here, Francesco, but a bit of advice.
I'm a complete outsider. I only launched my fund in December, so there you go. I feel myself not a VC enough for you to say whatever you want.
Well, we often have, even as CEOs, when we launch a business, we have this excitement. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and before you know it, I've got a hockey stick of revenue. Do not get drawn into it. Don't. Be honest with yourself. I can achieve this. Push yourself. Okay, it's going to be difficult to achieve this milestone, but if we focus, we can achieve it. But if you can continually be honest with yourself, don't get drawn away. Don't run away into that vision. Even though you're selling a vision to investors, don't sell a vision to yourself. You know it's what you want to get to, but there's so many other things in between that you've got to sell to yourself first. So do that, and it gives you a really, really good base to start.
Do you think that the choice of milestones therefore is also important? Because I'm starting to think, also, I mean, look, at the end of the day, even the technical ones amongst ourselves, we don't know the majority of the stuff we invest in, right? I mean, it's just the nature, even if you're a scientist or an engineer. So then effectively the company is presenting you with a vision. Obviously it cannot be like super simple or whatever. Obviously everybody would fall off, but when you set those early milestones, the choice of those milestones, does it mean also that you can in a way set your own goals so that you can achieve it, so that you're not effectively setting yourself up for failure? I guess that's what I'm trying to say, like telling us what we should be expecting to hear from you in 2 months, so that in 2 months we would invest, type of thing, right?
I think you've got it right, and I think you should be writing a pitch now, Francesco.
Well, like if you're right, because if I meet you the first time, maybe I'm not gonna write a check today, but if you tell me, hey, by the way, in 2 months I'll be here, and then in 2 months you are gonna be there, then unless you've done something so simple that is so easy to spot, I also need to follow you because you're the expert, right? I'm only the investor, right?
Yeah. You're absolutely right, and that is a really, it's a really good point you've just made. Quite often you'll go through fundraising rounds where the fundraising round takes 6-9 months, and in that time you've got to achieve milestones. So you're absolutely right. If I can come back to you across the length of that, because lawyers get involved, and you start to talk to more investors, and you get different kind of people involved. If I can come back to you and I want you as my investor, I can go, hey, Francesco, I know we talked 2 months ago, and I know you're interested, but by the way, here's an update of my timeline. I've hit those 2 milestones, by the way, and we're carrying on. And that for you, that's got to be something that's positive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess, if you don't get somebody because of personality match clash, you can only get somebody with results. And eventually you might even just create competition, so you might not even need that someone. So, hey, Francesco there missed out, and then Francesco's gonna cry in a few years' time when you become a unicorn.
No, absolutely. Cool. But you're right. But there are simple things. Think about, in my first couple of years, we had very few technical milestones or objectives on that timeline. A lot of them were functional things. And that's a really important point as well, because going back to the point about being the CEO in the business, what investors want to see is that you have good control and that you are able to grow a business. So don't be afraid of putting some of those milestones in. For example, our first milestone, major milestone, there are some minors, but major milestone was tech transfer. So tech transfer is not okay, it's technical, but you're just doing what you did somewhere else, right? But it's such a big step because you've moved from the lab and you've proven that you can do this thing in the real world. You've managed to get a facility, you've managed to get people, you've managed to be able to bring this, what was in a kind of nice, stable environment in the university, and bring it out into the real world. So tech transfer is a big milestone, and investors look at that and go, wow, okay, that is a big first milestone. And then beyond tech transfer, you've got, okay, we're gonna put our first prototype product together. Or if you want something in between there, we're going to have our facility with the correct equipment by a certain point in time. There are business milestones that are just as important to investors as the technical milestones, because they want to see your capability to grow their asset, basically. And if you're showing them you're running the business properly, then there's nothing to complain about.
Well, I think, look, I mean, I know there are a couple of questions, but I think actually this is super important, because I think we both agree on both sides of the table, the founder and the investor, that sometimes people forget that there are all these small things, small, but that they show that basically you set a target and you achieve it. It could be that like you went out and got to speak to the CEO of a large company, and the CEO has written you a nice letter, or letter of intent, or sometimes just the interest of engagement, and then a VC can reference that. Or it could be on the other side, that a client is a bit on the edge and you say, oh, I got a VC on board, and now you're a venture-backed company. So there are like small things, like it could be an angel that is super connected in the industry. Like knowing that you're going to do something and then you're achieving it, it could just be putting a business plan together that makes sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of founders, particularly in technical companies, forget that some of the things they do to get to the point of growing the business are important for the business to grow. And because you're tied up in this, we're going to make this device, we're going to get to market. Yeah, but all the other things, if you don't have those building blocks, you don't get there. And those building blocks are just as important. So yeah.
If you're in Cambridge and you manage to get a lab, that's a massive milestone these days, for example. Just like,
well,
hey, I did this.
If you want the biggest money saving tip I can give you, this is it. So we looked at labs in Cambridge, and the price of the labs at the time, this is 5 years ago, was about £35–36 per square foot. Now you've just raised 2.5–3 million, and you're about to spend, because we have a manufacturing requirement, you're about to spend 10% of that, on 15% even, on your lab. So I decided I'm not going to pay that. So I moved 10 miles north of Cambridge into an old disused factory at £3.50 per square foot, and built the lab myself, and so saved a huge amount of money. Now it's not as prolific as being on the Cambridge Science Park. However, it's close enough to Cambridge to attract all the students to come there. So in
Being
those early
strategic
days, the
about the
cash really
location.
matters.
Cool. Awesome, Simon. It's been great having you. We just got past the hour, but this has been super insightful, both on team building, mistakes and success, and how even to like structure yourself to actually get through. First get out, spin out, then raise your first money, and then set up yourself to follow up with investors and the right one for your later rounds, and then convincing customers at the same time and saving on your lab costs. There you go. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think the one last thing to say, anyone that's involved in a deep tech business, also don't forget the other asset that you have. There's one really big asset that you have, and that's excitement. So when you're coming to hiring, there are a lot of people that want to be involved in exciting new things. So maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway. I don't know whether anyone from Paragraf is watching. But use that excitement as a way to leverage people into the company, and use that excitement as a bargaining tool to get them to, they're going to help you deliver something that's changing the world. As a CEO, that's a huge, maybe not later in time down the road, but at the early days, it's a really big asset you can use. And you can even save some money with it.
Yeah, because also it's about how much people value the stock options that they have, and that's back to the vision, right? As much as an investor would be.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. Well, Simon, it's been great having you. I see Chris back
Yeah,
online.
I just wanted to say that, yeah, I mean, my name is Cristina Esteban, by the way, not Francesco Perticarari. But yeah, I mean, thank you so much, guys. Has been amazing interview or fireside chat. Very generous from you, Simon, sharing all of the little tips and things that you shouldn't have said, but you said. So thank you for that. And yeah, thank you everyone, of course, for joining. And again, Smart 81. And just to finish from my side, we have a lot of activities. So for the attendees, have a look on the website, and then hopefully we will meet in person. But yeah, thanks again, and I will let maybe Charlie wants to say a few words as well.
Only thanks to everyone for joining, and thanks to Fran and Simon for a super interesting conversation. I mean, I'm probably more on the software side and less on the sort of deep tech hardware side like you guys, but the lessons resonate across all startups in terms of bringing the right expertise in at the right time, controlling costs, being brave, fighting for every percentage of equity that you can. These are such fundamentals, and having that belief, I think, that you have a great business and a great opportunity. If you don't believe that yourself and you're not presenting that to investors, then they're of course going to beat you down. And stay strong to your stick to your guns and stay strong to your principles. And when you meet the right person that believes in you, they will see that return. And yeah, my experience is, don't always rush into funding, always find the right partner that can add value to your business, not just to the bottom line. But look, it's been super insightful. Really grateful for being able to sponsor the event and have everyone join. And yeah, if anyone does have any software requirements, then let us know.
If you're busy building your science in-house, and you don't want to bother with your website, your web app, or your client.
Well, yeah, exactly. Customer portal, PHP, stuff that you just don't want to be doing, send it our way, and we will do it to a high standard at a much fairer price, and let the right people get on with the right jobs in-house.
Great. Awesome. Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and thanks mostly to Simon for spending so much time sharing his journey.
Thanks for the opportunity, everybody. Really appreciate it. I hope I've said something useful. If not,
you definitely have. I've got notes myself, and I'm in theory the investor, so there you go.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.